for all this talk of the U.S. Making war a permanent war an industry, the fact is that right now the focus is on drawing down in Afghanistan, and you cannot at that point enter what could trigger, the old what is it, Colin Powell's old saying, the Pottery Barn rule.
You break it, you pay for it.
You break it, you own it. You break it, you own it. And the point is that we now have precedents in the region, and the biggest precedent that's high on the minds of people at the Pentagon is, of course, Iraq. And the chances of, if you militarize Syria at this point, you are almost certainly guaranteed to have a repeat of Iraq, because you have a whole patchwork of different ethnic groups, of different religions, of different regional alliances, and there's a lot of pent-up resentment inside of Syria. It spilled over in the past into Lebanon by proxy. But if what nobody wants to see is a failed state. Sending more weapons there, it seems like everybody wants to do something when you see these horrible, horrific images of indiscriminate shelling that are happening, not just in Homs, but in other cities inside of Syria. But sending more weapons maybe isn't the solution.
But what's our moral obligation? Do we have a moral obligation?
Here again is a tricky one, because if you pressure Russia, what are you going to do? Start a trade war?
What's our individual moral obligation as a country, though? As people who, as societies who allegedly believe in human rights and some kind of decency, do we have an obligation to intervene in these countries where there are horrific things that are happening? Like, we didn't do it in Rwanda. We haven't done it in the Palestinian areas. There's a lot of places we don't intervene, but the question is, do we have a moral obligation, or do we just have interests?
There's a lot of books written about how every involvement the West has had in the Middle East has ended up having a negative effect.
Right.
Long history of that.
Yeah. But again, we
tend not to look at it from their point of view and then try to work out with them. We tend to use our point of view and shove it down their throat.
But we can't depend. I mean, we have so much dependency on that part of the world for our daily life that we can't just simply let it go, is what I think the logic is.
No, and also, but the argument that you were just making, that it's about human life at some point, and we are a global village now, as the point that was made by Dale a little bit earlier about the fact that now we see these images on the web, and so there is the moral issue that is there is the sort of issue of a moral imperative at some point.
See, I'm much more cold on that, which is
I think that if you get the right journalists to go forth, and try to get the picture out there to the public, whether if you're a newspaper you work for or the channel you work for, or whatever, doesn't want to do it, put it in your blogs, get it out there. If you want to get people's attention, put it in Google Plus. If you get the right circles, they will run with it, and but people will start talking about it if you really want to get the message.
But listen, we don't have any shortage of horrific images out there about Syria.
Oh yes.
I mean, at the end of the day, in fact, the opposite is there.
We've got that all over the world, Eric.
Yeah. I mean,
it's all over the world. But in anything that you and anything that's horrific, if you just show people bad picture after bad picture, and doesn't give them substance of why we should care, and we should get involved, then your argument is mute especially to Americans.
And we can say, even in the United States, we can find pictures of horrific violence and the drug problem and all these things.
Fifth Ward in Houston is a war zone on a daily basis.
Yeah, so
I mean, North Houston, for instance, I can drive in North Houston, and I can see drug deals going down everywhere, violence everywhere. But there's hundreds of cops driving up and down the road every day, and not one cop will stop. There are parts in Houston that a crime will happen. A gang will run into a house, decimate everyone in there, and the cop will sit across the street, will not call for backup, wait for them to leave, and then go in and check to see what happened.
Wow.
And that's in Houston. So,
You were saying
the cops obviously feel they can't solve the root of the problem. And that's, again, back to the big question, is America the cop of the Middle East combined with their partners?
Well,
and the oil will flow no matter what.
1 second.
The oil will flow no matter what happens. Nothing is going to stop that. Whether it's in one person's hands or another, it will get to its destination at some price or another.
Yeah.
So it's
but Americans tend to want to own it.
Let me ask Paul Fox here a question.
Okay.
Paul, at the beginning of his mandate, Barack Obama made it clear he wanted the United States perhaps to shift its focus from the Middle East and Europe towards Asia. And it seems with the conflict in Syria, with the conflict in Libya, everyone's still asking America to sort of come back and stick around and for more. Because
no, not everybody. The Russians and the Chinese aren't asking America to do it.
In the West.
Yeah, but let's be clear. The West is a minority player in some of these issues.
Paul, the feeling is, has Obama been able to keep his eye on the ball when it comes to his plan to focus more on stronger ties with the East?
Well, I think that I think it was a couple of weeks ago, there was a big story of Australia where they had talked about they're going to be establishing a few naval bases,
marine bases
in northern Australia. And I was asking a couple of my Australian friends, how did they feel about that? Were they going to be okay with, American troops and sailors and whatnot being stationed there? And they were fine with it. They were, they thought it would be good for the economy and whatnot. And I guess that's one of the things that Obama's trying to do to position himself as, as sort of a parrying some of the military moves that China's been making of late. But one thing that, back to Syria, I wonder if because this is an election year, that he's not going to give it the direct attention that maybe it needs. If because maybe Americans are so war-weary that he won't take the position he took with Libya. I mean, Libya, initially people were saying, oh, he's leading from behind, it's not the right thing to do, but then, later it seemed to turn out a lot better because they didn't commit any troops on the ground. And it was more of a joint effort than we've seen in places like Afghanistan and Iraq. So, but in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, if this is an election year, I don't think he wants to really maybe get that confrontational with this issue.
Yeah, I mean, I lost a carton of cigarette bet on Libya with one of our reporters. I said, I'll bet you anything. She said, a carton of cigarettes that the U.S. will get involved in Libya. And I always thought, Obama's crazy to get into a third war in a Muslim country after the fatigue that we've got in the U.S. Lo and behold, he did. And the mythology, though, that
he was dragged into it.
But he was dragged into it. But nonetheless, the idea that Obama, this mythology that we did not we led from behind, that operation was a U.S. operation. It was a drone strike that effectively killed Gaddafi. It was our ships, our logistics, and there was a very small bit parts played by the British, the Qataris, and the French. This was a U.S. operation that could not have gone on without the United States. Right. The expense alone amid defense budget cuts in an election year seems hard to imagine that the U.S. will be able to proceed with any kind of effort. We also don't have anybody to support if we wanted to. Who are we going to give weapons to? What happens if we kill Assad? What happens on day two? Yeah. There's no organized entity to kind of fill the vacuum. And that was a problem in Iraq, too. So you got another Ba'athist country, which has been repressed, and there is no good outcome on this one. I mean, this is really a terrible, terrible story.
Exactly why we have the UN if the United States actually does all the work and forks all the money over.
If you have any faith in the UN,
I'm just saying, what's the reason for it except for just to say that we have it? If we don't all, give troops and money and everything to a central organization that, watch over that kind of stuff. If one particular country's always forking the bill for it, always doing all the fighting, why?
Matt, do you see the UN having a role in any of this?
Well, the UN has always had a very, very strong foundational role to diplomacy. And it still does in this case. It may not be any good at solving the big conflicts, and it probably shouldn't be involved in that. But down at the ground level, and not just, of course, in Syria, but in just about every country in the world, it forms a foundation for people to get together and have talks and have diplomacy. And,
Right.
and it's a massive effort that if you had never spent time in the UN or working with UN, I don't blame you for not knowing about it, because it's like knowing how the U.S. Army works or something like that from the inside. It's a tremendous organization.
It's quite cryptic, actually.
It's cryptic, but at the same time, I totally agree with that. The fact is that, first of all, you do need a talk shop. You do need a sort of a neutral hangout where people can go. And for instance, with Syria, the United Nations Commissioner for Human Rights is researching figures on exactly what the casualty toll is. Well, for us, that's the closest we've come to some sort of credible numbers as to how many people have been hurt and killed. And even that kind of information is very valuable in a situation where everything is so fuzzy and hazy and hard to confirm.
Yeah, there's so much more to the UN that hardly anybody even knows about. Like I said, if you haven't been involved in it, so you can't really criticize it. It's until you understand what it is and what they do.
Yeah. Well, we have a couple minutes left, and just wanted to kind of get a couple of final points. Matt, what kind of stories are you watching this week? What's the big story in Hong Kong that you're keeping an eye on?
You said Matt in Hong Kong?
Oh, I'm sorry, Paul.
Well, between Jeremy Lin and the chief executive scandals that are going on, there's really not much else. Any news that happens directly in Hong Kong is a storm in a teacup, basically. But the events coming out of Syria, I've been seeing a little bit on the DSK.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That was one of our biggest, most traffic stories for the past 2 days. Has been DSK and his prostitution rings, apparently.
He didn't know.
And of course, just today, there's the Australian Prime Minister is talking about some kind of a revote or something on the coming week. So that's pretty big news here.
We'll be talking about that in the world this week.
Hey, Matt, what are you following story-wise? What are some things that you think we might want to take a look at?
Well, Linsanity is global, I have to say. And I was at the Garden for the Laker game a week or so ago, so I experienced it firsthand.
And it's real, isn't it?
And you know what it is? It's a psychological thing. It's that our whole world is so organized and understood from media and the sports world, the statisticians. Everybody understands everything, and then there's something comes out of nowhere. And I think that's where the euphoria comes from. Like, imagine if some new leader came up in Syria and all of a sudden fixed everything. That's what Linsanity is.
Yeah, that's the insanity. And Dale, what's the story in Houston that we should be looking at?
I don't have any idea at all. It's 80 miles away from me.
What?
Every major city is 80 miles away from me.
Okay, what's the story in your town that's big right now?
I guess the biggest one would be trying to get stores in this town, but every time we try to, and if the one was a few years ago, but we're still reeling over it, is that the town voted to have Home Depot and Target move in, but the town council all got brand new cars, and we got Lowe's instead because Walmart owns part of their stock.
Okay. We'll keep it. We'll try and keep an eye on that one. Listen, guys, thank you so much for your time today. It was a really fun discussion. Nice to see you guys.